Welcome to episode 209 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 16th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to Amanda in Louisiana, Jen in Iowa, and Stephanie in New Hampshire, and to those of us who get together each Sunday on Clubhouse. Casey Boyd's weekly get-together, Boss Librarians and Friends, includes friends Stacy and Steve. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Longtime listener and guest on the podcast, Penny Walsh in New Zealand, is going to be recording an episode with me in this spring, and she had an idea. She asked if I would ever consider being a guest on my own show, and I thought that is a great idea. And I would love to be able to help her gather together some questions, ones I haven't seen. And so friends, Penny Walsh in New Zealand, who is a fantastic school librarian, she has been on episode 93 as well as episode 145, round 2, Can I Just Vent? So I strongly encourage you to consider asking yourself, is there a question that you've ever wanted to ask the host, me? And Penny is going to be collecting those questions, and we will be recording an episode this spring. So if you'd like to get a hold of Penny and share with her a question or two for the podcast episode, I have included her contact information in our show notes. And now a word from our official sponsor, Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I am so excited to be working with them. And now in a segment I like to call Why I Love Capstone. Friends, I make no secret of the fact that I used to be a history teacher, and so I find myself gravitating to certain series that Capstone puts out there, and this is, in this case, a brand new series in 2023, and it's called The Science of History. And one of the reasons why this really caught my eye, I was in a meeting with some teachers, and we are looking for interdepartmental units, meaning across the curriculum when you have teachers who are teaching different subject areas who decide to collaborate for an interdisciplinary approach to learning for the students to make it more meaningful. And we were sort of, working along some ideas. And then all of a sudden I looked at this whole series and I thought, wait, this is where history and science come together. And it really does speak to things that interest me. And I thought it was really fun because in this case, Capstone is creating books around this idea of combining science and history and hopefully tapping those areas of interest for our students, whether they realize it or not, because if they like one, there's a very good possibility that when you connect the two, that they're going to be even more interested. So in this case, I'd like to read a little bit from the website. It says here, go beyond history books to discover the science behind some well-known historical events. Find out how science helped the Mayflower cross an ocean and preserve the secrets of King Tut's tomb. Discover the science used to explore Antarctica and guide settlers along the Oregon Trail. The chronological telling of historical events combined with science. Context help readers think like scientists and discover new facts about history. So friends, these books are intended for an audience of probably 4th to 5th graders with a reading level starting at the 3rd grade. These are informational text, all published in 2023, and these books average about 48 pages long. The titles in the series include Science in King Tut's Tomb, Science of Machu Picchu, Science on Shackleton's Expedition, Science on the Mayflower, Science on the Oregon Trail, Science on the Titanic, Science on the Underground Railroad, and Science on Viking Expeditions. And I have said, as with all series, it wouldn't be a bad idea before you decide to distribute these is to keep them all in one really fantastic display so that students can see all the different books that are offered, because you better believe when they read one, they're going to want to read another one. And in this case, I would be sure to pull aside the teachers who are teaching your science units and making sure that they connect with the teachers who are doing the social studies units, and making sure that in this case, they have an idea of the kinds of books that you are providing in your library to support the kinds of learning that they're doing in their classrooms. Friends, I am so grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 5. They are offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for today's episode, Teach SDGs, and my conversation with Martha Bongiorno. Martha Bongiorno, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Amy. Thank you for having me back. So excited to be chatting with you this time around.
Friends, this is Martha's hat trick. All right, hockey fans. So, Martha, this is your 3rd time back on the show. Friends, if you haven't already, do make sure that you listen to Martha's first 2 episodes. I've attached them in the show notes. And those would be episode 80, Social Emotional Learning, the New Literacy, and episode 135, Navigating a New Library. Martha, you are always a fantastic guest. You seem to have so much expertise to share with listeners.
Oh, thanks, Amy. I really appreciate that. I just try a bunch of stuff and hope it works.
In trying a bunch of stuff, your willingness to struggle, to possibly flop. I know that a lot of us would hesitate to try something new because, there's a possibility the kids might not like it. And you seem to be fearless in that regard.
Well, I believe in modeling for our students and our staff. If I want our students and our staff to go out and change the world and try new things, I have to be doing the exact same thing. And if they don't like it, then you know what? We'll change it or do something different next time. So.
Life lessons for all of us. Friends, if you are just meeting Martha for the first time, I know we'd like a little context here. Martha, would you let us know where's your library located, a little bit about your school and the students that you support, and your grades that you have, and tell us a little bit about the programming in your space.
Yeah, so I am a media and education technology instructor. It's my official title, but I am a school librarian at heart, and I work at a brand new STEM magnet high school. We are a public STEM school that is right outside of North Atlanta in Georgia. And this is our 2nd year. So we've been open for about 1.5 years, but I've been with the school from the get-go, like from the very beginning. The architecture's been put in place, but I have filled the space with tons of our ideas and in the direction that we wanted to go. But before I came here, I have served in so many different capacities as a school librarian and an interdisciplinary humanities teacher. So I've worked in IB and STEM prior to this, and then I became a media specialist, and I worked in rural Georgia, and I've worked in all grade level bands now. So what you're hearing today is just almost 10 years worth of experience of being a media specialist, school librarian, but also my teaching experience prior to that. So
I'm convinced that, no experience is ever wasted. When you consider how many times we have to tap all the different skills that we bring to the job that we do every day, it's not unusual for you to realize, wow, I'm finding myself doing things that call upon the things I learned how to do, in my case, decades ago. And yet it makes us better able to serve our students and our staff every day. I think we also have to mention, that you are also fairly important in the leadership of the Georgia school librarians.
Yeah, I support our Georgia school librarians. I am the current president of the Georgia Library Media Association. I've been president-elect and worked with the communications team and all of that. But really, I can't take any credit for that because down here, I am so thankful for the group that I work with because it is a team effort. It is a whole group of us who just support one another and empower each other to keep trying to push that limit and do the next good thing for the kids. So
before we dive into today's topic, #Teach SDGs, I'd like to go into some detail about 2 video clips you recently posted. And of course, I linked in the show notes. The first video that I could not stop watching is something that I call, you put this in the video, things that just make sense. And friends, definitely take a look at it. But, when it comes to things that just make sense, I see a lot of intentionality in your space and a lot of social emotional learning in practice.
Yes. So at the end of the day, my job is to be a good steward of our space and make sure that our students' voices are the primary thing that you see and hear all day, right? This is not my space. This is everybody's space. This is a community that we're putting together. So the things that just make sense in our space, they all go back to that. How am I empowering students to be leaders, creators, good thinkers, critical thinkers, and just good people, at the end of the day. So it's a lot of inside jokes that we have going on, a lot of fun that we do with our programming, but it's a lot of welcoming space and making sure that they feel like no matter who they are or what they're thinking that they may be in life or what they want to be in life, this is a safe space to explore that. And then curriculum tie-ins, right? Because we're still instructional partners and we want to make sure that we're academic spaces. And so we do a lot in our library to support that in very intentional ways. We have a seed library, a free seed library that we started this year that we work with our biotechnology lab with, which we could get into when we talk about SDGs and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I want to make sure, definitely take a look at the 2 videos because the other one, which you posted on December 31st, really was a celebration of all the things that you can celebrate when it comes to 2022. I hope you will indulge me because there are some things that I know listeners are going to watch and just say, oh, wait, back up. I got to see that again. So, first of all, you mentioned that you have a library board.
I do.
And can you tell us just a little bit about your library board? Because I know that there are listeners who would love to put something like that in their own space.
Yeah. So I have to give props to Andy Plemons. This is something that I have been doing since when I was an elementary media specialist. I've always had some type of student leadership board capacity in some way, whether that's a book club that you kind of hone in and ask questions with. But in my current space, it is genuinely student-led programming. We have about 80 students in our student library advisory board out of the 1,200 students in our building. And we meet on a weekly basis in some capacity. So we have 2 students who lead overall. We have our student library board leader, and then we have a makerspace lead, and then we're broken down into committees. So we do author visits, we do programming, we do volunteer service. So we are very organized, and it's all volunteer based. None of this is credit hours or anything like that. So they do get service hours in some ways sometimes, but they choose to be in there and make it their own. And that was the first thing I did when I got hired for this position, was start that. And I knew some of the kids in our community and reached out to them and asked them, like, hey, I'm starting to put in book orders, like, what do you want to see? Like, or I'm starting to put in makerspace materials. They've given me this budget from the county. Like, what do you want in this space? So we've been together since day one.
Well, and I think you remove some of the element of doubt when you have so much buy-in by your stakeholders. I'm starting to sound like an administrator.
It's true, though.
So when you have all that buy-in from your stakeholders, you have that, you can feel confident that when you are spending that money for which you are a custodian, you are assigned responsibility to spend this money in the best way possible, to have so many students that are chiming in at the onset. But this isn't about, oh, what'd you buy us, Miss Bongiorno? They're like, no, actually, we picked those out. And I think that would, that kind of ownership, it goes a long way. I gotta say, I love the use of all that glass because you use it to showcase the students' work, and glass is so much more inviting because you can see through it as well, and it's not like a display case or a showcase where you're dealing with a fixed space and it's sort of dark and enclosed, but you sort of bright open spaces and you take advantage of all that opportunity to display your students' work. Tell me about the Post-it note art, because that can't come from nowhere. Like, how did you get that idea?
So it's just something fun that we do. So our school is a little different than a traditional high school because we're a STEM magnet high school. We have these things called Flex Fridays. So not every student is on campus on Fridays. We are a Monday through Thursday only school, and Fridays are for projects. So we kind of do like mini conferences every single Friday where students get to choose sessions that they go to. So, we do a lot of makerspace stuff on those Fridays, like teach and learn, student-led, how to use the machines, that sort of thing. But then we also just do programming. Like, we did our blind date for a book. Like, a bunch of kids came in and decorated the books, that kind of thing. But we worked with the math department and engineering for that Friday, and they did pixel art, and they had to come up with the dimensions and all of that, and then they got to display it out. And it's not just our library, it's everywhere, like in the entire building. And it's so fun. But we kind of treat our space like installation art, I guess, like where it's just changing based on the programming that we're doing. And kids write all over the glass, like all the time, keeping notes and writing notes to each other, but also doing schoolwork and that sort of thing. So.
Wow.
But it was fun.
I so want to teach at your school.
Come on, Amy.
I so want to teach in your school. You mentioned in your video, your end of the year video, that you were celebrating authentic learning and creative literacy. And can you tell us what you think creative literacy looks like in your program?
I think creative literacy is having students look at something in a new way. Like whether that is, art or music, or even with academia, researching and figuring something out that you didn't know before. It is putting something new into existence. And how do we build those skills for them? That's my entire goal. It's like matching their voice with how do you take that and do something with it.
Oh, I love all of this. I think it would be helpful once listeners take a look at these videos to have some context. Is it fair to say that your library program has benefited from a sustained commitment by your administration to provide you with an ample annual budget? You mentioned county money as well. Now I'm really curious. It sounds like there is money coming from multiple directions.
So, I will say it was a shock for me going to a fully funded library because I have worked in libraries with $0 budget living on grants or donations. Like, I have been there. So I do want to preface this whole conversation by saying I know what that's like. But yes, I am 100% funded, like fully funded for every student in the building. And my administration trusts me to make the decisions that are best for our space based on the goals that our administration and I have come up with for that space. So within that, I'm allowed to do programming and book purchases. And, I had the limitations that our county has, of course, but like I am trusted as a good steward of taxpayer dollars. And I am so appreciative of that. And it's not just monetary support. Like, I have administration support wholeheartedly in our programming. I have a para and getting a second para because we are a 2-floor library. So being able to have one person on each floor, which allows me the free space to be able to go work with teachers and that sort of thing. So, yes, I am very, I hesitate using the word blessed because I don't know if that's the correct term, but I am grateful for this opportunity. Isn't it to be trusted as an expert in my field, that I know what I'm doing?
You have an appreciation and awareness of how incredibly fortunate you are. But I think it's also worth mentioning that there are listeners who have had their purchasing called into question. There are listeners who are tuned in for whom their book orders have to be scrutinized by non-librarians. There are, I've heard of librarians whose purchases have to be scrutinized by a committee of community members who are going to decide whether or not those purchases are appropriate. And in full, if we're being honest here, I have been reprimanded for making purchases at Sam's Club that were not approved prior to going to the store and buying those books. So understand that to be trusted with the ability to make those purchases with our students' needs in mind, I don't think we can ever take it for granted, because there are administrators who feel that they have to exercise that oversight. And how nice for you that you have an opportunity to breathe and know that with that student board that you have, you are making purchases that have already been considered by the people who matter. I'm sorry, that the people who are going to be the direct beneficiaries of your spending are the ones who are making those decisions, as opposed to adults who might never appreciate how meaningful this is to them.
100%. And I am very grateful for this situation. I nominated my principal this year for Principal of the Year for our state organization because we need to shine light on those that are doing the right thing and supporting our libraries in the ways that we need to be supported. And so I came from the polar opposite prior to this. And for me, it's been a learning experience on how to rely on an administration and have those honest conversations and not feel like I'm going to get yelled at or reprimanded in some way. I am still dealing with our county level policies, which are a little different. I still have to post all my book list to our library website, so it's open for the community. And we've had book challenges this year. I've had our book fair challenged this year. So even in a what I would consider more progressive school like mine, we are still dealing with things, but we have the administration support behind us that sees students first and not taking the comfortable route.
I have a question, and maybe you know the answer to this. So in the state of Michigan, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, Our organization sees the partnership with our administrators so vital that when we register to attend our conference, if we bring an administrator, the administrator goes to our conference for free. And it is completely, intentional and done so because we want to make sure that our principals and our administrators see what we do. Can I ask, has Georgia ever extended that kind of invitation to administrators to come to your conference?
We have, and we've had our principal of the year, our administrator of the year, they usually come and talk and present in some way with that person that nominated them. So it is vital. And it's vital that they see us in our element too, not just in our school element, so that we can continue that conversation. And I do want to give a shout out to AASL, who's been doing work with this, trying to get our school librarians and administrators to present together to broaden that voice across different conferences so that this conversation can continue outside of our school librarian conversation.
Well, and I remember at AASL in Salt Lake City that there was a panel of administrators speaking at one of the morning sessions. And of course, there is this need to get some more of that administrative buy-in. We need to win over more converts because so many of them might harbor those sort of antiquated ideas of what it is a school librarian does. And the more we can expose them to all of we have potentially, all the potential good we can do. It only benefits us to make sure that they come and see how, as an organization, both a statewide organization and a national organization, we have the ability to affect real change in their spaces, in their schools. Right.
I agree. And I think we need to do a better job. I know we're kind of going down a rabbit hole, but as a profession in our coursework ahead of time, like I didn't have one course thing that I went through in my master's or my specialist degree that had taught me how to have conversations with administrators. And I feel like that's so important because their job is so huge. They see so much more than just the library. Like I totally get why they push back in some way. So if we don't know how to speak their language and kind of look at their currency and fit in with that and have those very frank conversations, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. So the more we can have these conversations, Amy, I think the better, and getting that language out there on how to talk to principals, how to talk to administrators, superintendents, and that sort of thing. And GLMA started that. So if you want to go to our page, we do have some resources on little speech bubbles that you can do. It's under our advocacy piece. And,
well, and friends, we'll be sure to include a link in the show notes. I did want to also mention that there is an episode that I recorded in March of 2021 with Blake Hopper and Vicki Winstead, episode 117, teaming up with your administration. And one easy tip is to take on one of their problems. And that's if you go to your administrator and if you manage to take on and solve or be part of that solution, one of the problems that is sort of impacting the school, all of a sudden you make yourself relevant in their sort of repertoire of solutions. You're like, look, you want them to realize how much of an opportunity we present to make those changes across all of our students and teachers as well. Mm-hmm. So
there are two questions I ask all the time with our administrators and our leadership team. And it's, what does success look like to you? So in the end, what does that look like? So I can see their vision and work backwards. And when do you need this by? And it helps me set a boundary on when they need these things, and that sort of thing. And it respects their time and my time. But the success question, I was shocked my principal had never heard that question before. Like, he's never been asked, like, what does success look like to you? Like, where do you see the library in 2 years or in 5 years? Where do you see? That amazed me. And it makes me wonder if others have had that same experience.
Well, they're going to now because they're
do it, Pete.
So everybody just write that little question down and note to self, put that on a Post-it note on your laptop and make sure that this becomes part of your next conversation. Because when we work with our principals, this can't just be the only time when we have our mid-year and then we have our year-end evaluation. There's got to be more to that. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Go ahead and dive into today's topic. I make no secret of the fact that I scour our guests' bios on social media. And that is exactly. Now, of course, I'm always looking for an excuse to talk to Martha. I truly, truly am. But in this case, you included #Teach SDGs in your Twitter bio. And so, friends, I'm going to be the first to admit this episode is a listener request. And it was from more than a year ago. I have always had it on my radar, and I have never made this kind of progress in finding an actual librarian who wants to. I was aware of the organization, but I was never putting it together with somebody who might be interested in being on the show. So it has taken me a while to find you, Martha, although you and I are already friends, and I should have just kind of could have figured this one out. But integrating sustainable development goals into the library program. And thankfully, we have connected enough times that I know that you've got some suggestions on how others can, whether we're looking to go all the way in and commit to being a school that supports sustainable development goals, or if we want to start sort of nibbling at this and taking little sort of dip our toe into this. I'm hoping that this conversation is one that'll help listeners take on some part or all of this monumental task.
What you're talking about, the Sustainable Development Goals, is from the United Nations. It was accepted and signed off on in 2015, actually on my birthday, September 25th, in 2015. And so this is something that's kind of been on the forefront of me as an educator, just because I've always worked in IB or STEM in some capacity. And I started working with the Sustainable Development Goals when I was teaching 2nd and 3rd graders, and we were doing passion projects in our little baby maker space, and we were talking about recycling and talking about how that affects the climate and in smaller elementary chunks, but learning how to create with purpose has always been something that we've included in some way, shape, or form. And that's kind of escalated now that I'm in a high school setting that values project-based learning. So it's a little different. But if you've never heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them. And these are goals that countries that are a part of the United Nations have signed off on, saying that these are the most important things to transform our world, make sustainable change by the year 2030. And so it's a big chunk. COVID came and put us a little behind on some of these. So 2030 feels like maybe out of reach, but that does not mean that there are not things that we can do and small incremental changes that we can do as a person or within our libraries. So,
well, and I love that you've had an opportunity to tackle the sustainable development growth goals, both as a traditional classroom educator as well as a school librarian. And, understand, friends, that when we talk about these goals, we're talking about things like world hunger. We're talking about poverty. We're talking about medical care. And unfortunately, you look at so many of these issues are issues that hit countries on much larger scales. And so when you think about the scale of this, number 4, global education, something which, depending on where you live, you might take for granted. Gender equality. Hey, here's one that we need to work on. I'm not going to throw too many opinions around, but the fact is that, when you look at some of these and you sit there and go, actually, these are issues which impact everybody on some level. You can't sit there and say, this isn't a problem here. This isn't, well, it may not be a problem for you, but I think we have to move beyond the immediacy of ourselves and recognize that this is an exercise in empathy, in building an awareness for people beyond our reach and trying to impact change in that respect. Because, you look at some of these goals and, clean water. Okay. Who's going to disagree with that? And why not introduce this idea? I mean, I got to be honest, living here in the state of Michigan, clean water, we don't take that for granted. We have entire communities that are still on bottled water because Flint, Michigan was for a short while on the national news because we couldn't provide drinking water to the members of the community of Flint, Michigan. So, I think that we have to not just look, globally, but we also have to realize that we are dealing with problems, many of these problems, right here in our backyards.
Yes. And so I look at it like you have global action, local action, and then people action. So breaking that down into these 3 different components, like what can we do to branch out and see ourselves in the larger community? But like you said, our local community is just as important. What gender issues are we seeing in our local community? What equitable access issues? And that COVID right there brought all that to the forefront. But also what can I do as a person to make sustainable action within in my home, in my community? Am I an advocate for these things? We all play a critical role, and libraries have always been, right there on the cusp of change and pushing people to consider all points of view, all perspectives, right? And supporting and building community. And that's what the SDGs to me is all about. It's we've always been these people that foster empathy, these buildings that foster empathetic opportunities, or opportunities to grow empathy. And this is just another avenue to do that. It just gives us common language and common goals, and the amount of resources that are out there for you as a media specialist, as a school librarian, as an educator. There are so many things out there that you can take and personalize for your students, whether it is, like you said, Amy, little chunks that we want to do here and there, or on these larger scales, if you are doing project-based learning and things like that. And we do both in our library.
Wow. I'm curious because you've worked with littles and you're now teaching high schoolers. When you incorporate the components of sustainable development growth goals into the activities and the projects that you are doing, would you compare for us how your second graders responded to some of these initiatives versus, say, your teenagers that you teach now?
I would say almost exactly the same way, except my high schoolers are just as passionate as our second graders are, in my opinion. The passion that I see in our youth to make a difference and have the ability to be given space to explore that and be able to go out and make a difference with it. I will say our second graders are okay that they 3D printed a little recycling bin and they're done, right? They felt like they did something productive and they're good. Or they'll go home and be like, we have to recycle all of our Coke cans, and that sort of thing. But our high schoolers are not good with that. They're like, no, what else are we going to do? Where does this go from here? There is no end to them. It is a part of who they are now. I feel like they've always grown up with this generation of students. they know what climate action is. They know what environmental stewardship is. And so they're looking on how to actually make a real difference. Like we have cosplay and things like that. Like, how do you work on fashion in a sustainable way? So instead of buying all these new clothes, like, how can I sew my own clothes or fix the hem? Or, we thrift these things and then manipulate it in a different way. So these hip, cool kids, man, I love them. They're out to change the world. We just have to give them opportunities to do that and ask them, what are you interested in? And somehow tie that in. We started off at kickoff last year. So we were brand new last year, like starting from scratch. And one of the biggest things we did was our Women's History Month. We did it in March, and we put in a huge art installation in our library, which we call the Exchange, by the way. I don't know, but if you're looking online, it's called the Exchange because we're the heart of the school, the X, the whole thing. And we're exchanging information and ideas all the time. Anyway, so women in STEM, and every student and teacher, staff member that identified as woman or non-binary submitted a picture. They posted a Flipgrid or a flip video talking about their experience as a female in this environment in STEM, which has been primarily men for a long time. And we put this huge thing up with all their pictures, and it says Women in the Sequel. We did a Spotify collaborative playlist, and then we did a Women in STEM walk out in the front of our school. We're in a downtown area, so all of these people who go and walk their dogs, they take their kids out there, they were able to go and walk and read about the history of women in STEM and be able to scan QR codes and see a Padlet. That was a collaborative thing with our student library board. So, that was where we started. And that goes back to the SDGs about gender equality. We talk a lot about all of that right now. And that was a really good starting point for them.
Well, and I love that you've taken something that is student generated and put it in a place where the public can benefit from their hard work. Mm-hmm. And this isn't just a project they go home and show their parents and say, hey, look what I did at school today. You are creating an opportunity for the community to appreciate the learning that is happening inside the walls of your school, because obviously bringing the community writ large into our spaces comes with that's a little difficult, not just during a pandemic, but having random strangers walking through our schools also is something that could create an issue. But if you bring the school outside for the community to see all the amazing things that you're doing, and forgive me, but especially when we talk about today's youth, it's a little hard not to think of them as being a little self-involved, a little self-absorbed. I think that it's fair to say that teenagers, it's not an uncommon trait for our teenagers to be a little self-absorbed in all things that revolve around themselves. So that's what makes this global focus and local focus so appealing, because it's our opportunity to bring the world to our students, bring our students into a space where they can make some changes in the world.
I agree. And I think, this term has been thrown around for a long time since I've been started in passive programming. So what are some smaller things that you can do? Like write cards, can you write letters to your, your Congress people and that sort of thing about what is something that you're passionate about and a story that you have about why it's important. And I think going back to, you talked about the videos at the very beginning. That's why I do so many videos, because, I've written a lot and I've sent emails and I've done those things. But unless they physically see what difference our kids are making and the reason this is important, they need to see it to experience it in the same way that our kids do. And And I think just the visual nature of things nowadays is so important. If they want to make a TikTok about climate change, go for it. Let's do it. Like we have to meet students where they're at and understand, they can be self-absorbed. But I also urge us to consider they just haven't had that opportunity to become intellectually curious yet. You can't be curious about something you haven't been exposed to. It's all about the background knowledge that we're providing. So a lot of our students who are just coming out of COVID, who are, unaware of a lot of things socially, or have gone down this rabbit hole of misinformation and all of that, it is our job to make sure that we're exposing them to a lot of different perspectives and how other people are living their lives so that they have the opportunity to be curious and dig deeper into it and to see how do my skills and what I like to do fit in with helping other people. So the more opportunities to grow that, the better.
Can I ask, because I'm curious, when you initiated the integration of the Sustainable Development Growth Goals into your library program, was that part of a larger building-wide initiative, or is this something that you decided to do because you recognized all the good it could bring to your students and to your school?
I would say both. So I think I talked about this in another episode with you about starting a new program, but one of the very first things I do at the start of any school year is I look at our school's action plan, like what is our strategic plan? What are my principals' goals for the year? And how can I help with those goals, right? And so our entire building is based off project-based learning. We do a lot of design thinking, inquiry-based learning, and that sort of thing. I am the lead for all of our professional development in the building, and all of that. So I am put on a different pedestal within our building, making sure that I am modeling what we're expecting in the classrooms. But I also just am very passionate about it, and our students are passionate about it. So, I think it goes hand in hand, right? And we have a lot of student and teacher input into the programming that we do. So.
Well, and I have to imagine that if you want to take to dip your toe into this and try this out, friends, what administrator or teacher would stand in the way of the school librarian whose goal it is to bring awareness to the 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Growth Goals, which our students are going to learn more and more about, and the world around them. It seems like an easy sell. I don't see many administrators going, "Oh, what are you doing down there? Hey, Martha, I hear you're doing something down in the library. What is it?" You don't have to. Yeah, it's not a hard sell.
No, and there are some very tiny things that I think that we can leave with that you can implement. So one of the very first things on the Sustainable Development Goals talks about 1 and 2 talk about no hunger and no poverty. And so we are in the position to remove fines to provide equitable access to all learning materials. That is like it. If you are still fining students for late books, let's get rid of it. Let them bring in canned food for paying off fines or something like that. If you feel like you need to still have something, have it have purpose. Do you know what I mean? Like that is one of the biggest things you can do. Quality education, providing equitable access. Like how are we providing, equitable Wi-Fi access in our homes, one-to-one devices, all of those components to that, making sure that our students have available books that they can see themselves in and they can see other people in would be another really big one that we can start. And that gets into gender equality and things like that. And then I will also say,
it starts with us. What you're saying, it starts with us. Like,
We are change makers, Amy.
If the librarians implement the Sustainable Development Growth Goals and the very core concepts that it stands for in our own programs, we are modeling all of those things which can then be applied to the larger world around us.
Yes, for sure. I know.
That's a lot. It's a lot.
It is. It is. So I started, there's a really great book by Jennifer Williams, Dr. Jennifer Williams, and it's called Teach Boldly Using Edtech for Social Good. And it's not directly tied to the SDGs. So if some of this is a little controversial for you, like I get it, like, you know, being in the South, I know what's going on. That's a really good place to start. And it gives real strategies that you could do with PD with your teachers, or send it out, or do a book club in some way. The United Nations also has SDG book clubs, and they list a whole resource of elementary picture books, you know, chapter books and that sort of thing. And that's a really good source for you too. There are 2 projects that are going on. One is called Take Action Global and the Goals Project. And both of those are global. You sign up, it's 100% free, and they partner you with classrooms from all over the world. They give you a sustainable development goal that you both work on, and you come up with some type of product together, and they give you lessons every week. It's about 6 weeks long, and they do a lesson a week, and then you're able to be able to collaborate with this other class. So, you know, we talk about being a future-ready librarian, meeting these standards that we have, in all of that, and being a global collaborator, a knowledge constructor from the ISTE standards. And those are perfect ways to get started, because it takes the pressure off of you to have something ready to go, and then you can personalize it for your students. So I'll send that to you, and you can leave that in your notes.
Well, and friends, I'm thinking that a couple of you already have that grant in your mind, that you've got that SDGs grant that you now want to write, because if this involves building out our collections, if this includes having a book club with teachers in your building, all of a sudden you write that grant. Who's not going to fund that? I mean, these are all amazing things that we can do to improve our immediate space and the world around us, and raise that kind of awareness for our students. Martha, you've given us so much to go on. I'm so grateful. Can I ask you, I noticed there's an app that educators can put on their phones. Is that something that you would recommend? Have you tried that? Because in fairness, I didn't get a chance to do that before our conversation.
Yeah, so there's one called Earth Project that I would highly recommend if you're able to do that, if you have iPads or in some way, shape, or form, but you keep track of like how your carbon emissions and all that kind of stuff kind of add up, and you can do it in your building. So if you want to set up a challenge in some way, you know, that would be a really cool thing, especially with Earth Day coming up in April. I'm just throwing that out there. That would be a cool thing to do, like a challenge throughout the month. Partner that with like a beanstalk challenge if you have that, or a reading challenge in some way. And then there's the SDGs in Action, I think is what it's called. And that one's pretty good. I don't use that one as much because I use the online resources. And then there's also a toolkit, I think is geared more towards public libraries, but the IFLA has a toolkit online for SDGs and that sort of thing that I've kind of taken just for wording. Since you mentioned grants, they have really great wording on like how we can influence, you know, our community and embed this into our programming in an official way, right?
I think what is exciting is whether you tackle one of these goals or 2 of these goals, or you see yourself trying to reach as many of these goals in some capacity or another, it's always going to be a win for your students. You know, I know there are 17 goals, but you're not obligated to solve all of them. And but tackling a few of them at a time, what a wonderful way to help your students build an awareness and an empathy for others.
You can do it. We can be the change makers that support our students who are going to solve the world's problems. That's our mission.
Martha Bongiorno, you are always welcome back on the show. I am so grateful you took time out of your busy day. And please let listeners know where we can find you.
I can be found in all the places online, but my primary one's over on Instagram. So it's at Mrs._Bongiorno. I am active on Twitter, but Instagram's my place. Slide into my DMs. I'd love to chat, share resources, all the things. But I'll see y'all at the AASL conference down in Tampa this year. So that'll be exciting.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. I will see you in Tampa. Have a great evening, Martha.
Thanks, Amy.
Friends, whether you are interested in diving into the SDGs or if you just like to dip your toe, I got to tell you, the show notes are fantastic. Martha is so incredibly generous in sharing with us the resources, and I'll tell you, it kind of is a one-stop shop. So if you are at all interested, make sure that you take some time to go and visit all the show notes, which we have made sure to include in this week's episode. If you found today's episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving some fan mail for our friend Martha, either on Instagram or on Twitter, and consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. One last friendly reminder, friends, I encourage you to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more using the code UNITED. The topic of our next episode will be IB Librarian and my conversation with Graham Boyd and Claudia Janik. I hope you will tune in.